In wide-ranging remarks on the Senate floor Tuesday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer urged fellow lawmakers to support ratifying the Kigali Amendment. He noted the senators will be able to cast their first vote on the amendment on Tuesday afternoon. Schumer described the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol as, quote, one of the most significant bipartisan measures the Senate takes on all year, and said it would, quote, affirm our country's intention to phase down the use of hydrofluorocarbons, commonly known as HFCs, by 85% over the next 15 years. The Montreal Protocol, which was first signed in 1987, has had wide-ranging benefits in the fight against climate change.
Now, Mr. President, later today, the Senate will take the first step towards ratifying an amendment to one of the most successful international environmental agreements in modern history, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. Members can expect to cast the first vote on cloture later this afternoon after the weekly party lunches. Today's vote will require 60 votes in the affirmative to move forward. And since the Kigali Amendment is part of a treaty, will require 2/3 of the chamber to ultimately ratify this provision. The Kigali Amendment will be one of the most significant bipartisan measures the Senate takes on all year. And that's saying something, because we've done a lot. It would affirm our country's intention to phase down the use of hydrofluorocarbons, commonly known as HFCs, by 85% over the next 15 years. Experts say this step alone could prevent 0.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the 21st century. Is that incredible? 0.5 degree. We struggle to get there, and this one measure would do it. That may not seem like much, but within the larger context of global temperatures, it is really very significant. There are two paths our country can take, depending on what we do with the Kigali Amendment. If we ratify this treaty, not only will we protect our planet, but this is an economic issue and an issue to go after China, which is a rogue nation in this regard. It'll provide us a golden opportunity for American businesses to dominate an emerging business. Excuse me. Every year, millions of refrigerators and AC units are sold around the world. And in the United States, many families own more than one refrigerator. That's a lot of appliances that will need HFC alternatives, which U.S. businesses particularly already are working to prepare for. By one measure, the combined impact of ratifying the Kigali Amendment and other steps we've taken to reduce HFCs would create 150,000 new jobs and generate nearly $39 billion in investment by 2027 as new markets open up for trade. So this, in many ways, is a pro-jobs measure, one supported by the Chamber of Commerce, by major retailers like Walmart, by the Semiconductor Industry Association, and many other business groups. If we fail to ratify the amendment, the rest of the world is going to move on without us. Without Kigali, we're going to play second fiddle to nations like China, whose businesses will surpass ours in developing viable HFC alternatives, taking jobs that by all rights belong here in America. And by 2033, parties to Kigali will be prohibited from any trade with in HFCs with non-Kigali nations. We'll lose out tens of billions of dollars of sales. There's no reason to have that happen. Ratifying Kigali will not require any change in the current U.S. law. We already have domestic policies phasing out HFCs here at home. So we're putting into practice many of the reforms the Kigali Amendment calls for. And no consumer will have to change any appliance. So, for the sake of U.S. businesses, for the sake of U.S. innovators, for the sake of making sure China has to comply and be part of the world community and not do what they think is just good for themselves, which seems to be President Xi's way of doing things, I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of advancing the Kigali Amendment later today. It's low-hanging fruit for creating tens of thousands of good-paying jobs right here at home. Now on the Disclose Act. Later today, President Biden will deliver remarks on one of the gravest dangers undermining our democracy, the power of dark money that has taken over our elections. I expect the President's remarks will preview action here in the Senate, where we will have a vote this week to begin debate on the Disclose Act, a bill I have long promised to bring to the floor, in which my colleagues, led by the indefatigable and relentless and brilliant Senator Whitehouse, have done a wonderful job championing this issue for years. The Disclose Act is very simple to grasp. It would require super PACs and other dark money groups to report anyone contributing $10,000 or more during an election cycle. The same goes for any group spending money in support or in opposition to judicial nominees. In other words, it would apply similar forms of transparency that traditional campaigns and candidates already face. We have to disclose when accepting political contributions. And frankly, why shouldn't this be law? What reason under heaven is there for keeping massive political contributions hidden from the public? Even the Republican leader, who has dedicated much of his career, unfortunately, to killing many campaign finance reforms, claimed in the past to support increased disclosure, though sadly he's opposed to our bill today for no good reason. If you're for disclosure, you should be for our bill. And these flimsy arguments that it'll deter people from giving are absurd. Absurd. If the multimillionaire wants to spend colossal sums on candidates or nominees who are deeply anti-choice, who support anti-democracy candidates, or who harbor views deeply in conflict with the views of the general public, shouldn't the public at least have a right to know it? The rights of voters and the health of our democracy far outweighs any interest that a multi-billionaire could have in concealing political spending from public scrutiny. So, the Disclose Act will give every senator a choice: a vote to bring transparency to elections or stand with the forces of dark money. Let me say that again. The Disclose Act will give every senator a choice: vote to bring transparency to our elections, remove the veil from this dark money that that the public hates, that's cascading into our elections, or stand on the side of dark money. Who wants to be on that side? We'll see this week. I want to take a moment now to thank my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, for his incredible work championing this legislation. He's arguably the Senate's greatest champion in the fight against dark money, someone who's dedicated years to uncovering the pernicious links between dark money groups and radical judicial nominees. You want to know one of the main reasons we have a MAGA court that overturns Roe v. Wade, that stands in the way of smart gun control laws, gun safety laws, that stands in the way of environmental progress? It's because of dark money in good part. Dark money. Sheldon Whitehouse has exposed this link better than anyone I know. He's gotten the rest of us to pay attention in a deeper way to the gravity of this issue. He'll come to the floor later today, throughout the week, to continue highlighting this issue. And I know others will be joining to stand by his side. I thank him for his work. I thank the President for speaking about it this afternoon. And I stand with Senator Whitehouse in highlighting this issue ahead of the vote and urge my colleagues to support the Disclose Act. And finally, on Judge Pan, or second to last on Judge Pan. In other matters, today the Senate will vote to confirm our 6th Circuit Court judge in the month of September, Judge Florence Pan, to sit on the all-important D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. If confirmed, Judge Pan will make history as the first Taiwanese American ever to serve on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, joining in the proud company of so many other Biden nominees who expanded the diversity and experience of the federal bench. As we all know, the D.C. Circuit Court is the second most important federal court in the country after the Supreme Court. Before this court comes disputes that involve Congress and much of the federal government, so many of its decisions involve constitutional or administrative law. It goes without saying that nominees to this court must be individuals of the highest caliber. They need to be experienced, balanced, and above all, committed to the rule of law. That's exactly what we have in Judge Pan. She's had over a decade of experience as a judge in the District of Columbia and has seen practically every legal dispute under the sun. She's already well known to this chamber, having been confirmed as a district judge with 68 votes. She should be similarly confirmed with bipartisan support. And last but certainly not least, Puerto Rico. As our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico continue to feel the wrath of Hurricane Fiona, we continue to monitor the situation here in Congress. Over the weekend, President Biden issued an emergency disaster declaration for Puerto Rico, where 75% of the costs of emergency medical care, disaster, and food distribution will be covered by the federal government. Yesterday, I got on the phone with the FEMA administrator and urged FEMA to approve Puerto Rico's request to increase that figure to 100% and to stand ready to approve a major disaster declaration request to unlock not just response money, but funding needed to recover and rebuild. And on the call were my colleagues, Representatives Velasquez and Espaillat, and I echoed the calls from my colleagues to ensure maximum flexibility for those applying for FEMA assistance and to get federal funding out of the door ASAP. Puerto Rico desperately needs it. Later this morning, I will join with the Hispanic Federation and a number of my colleagues to talk about additional steps we are calling on the federal government to take, including steps to strengthening Puerto Rico's electric grid. The electric grid is almost, it's 50 years out of date. It's particularly susceptible to hurricanes. It hasn't even been repaired since the damage Maria 5 years ago put upon it. And yet we've given lots of federal money for the reestablishment of the rebuilding of the grid, and very little has happened. 5 years, so we need to focus on that issue as well as others. 5 years to the day after the arrival of Maria, Puerto Rico needs help to recover from Fiona. We need to make sure this time Puerto Rico has absolutely everything it needs as soon as possible for as long as they need it. I yield the floor.